So I'm speaking with composer and conductor Justin Freer, who is also the principal conductor and producer, as well as the co-founder of CineConcerts. CineConcerts specializes in full score performances, live to picture, and since their launch in 2013, they have put together some amazing events for not just soundtrack fans, but movie fans worldwide. And their first concert was Gladiator Live, based off that success. CineConcerts went to produce concerts with scores performed to picture from classics like The Godfather, Breakfast at Tiffany's, It's a Wonderful Life, the entire Harry Potter franchise. And beyond that, they've also did a fantastic Star Trek: The Ultimate Voyage to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, as well as DreamWorks Animation in concert. Justin, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So to start off, I would love to just kind of know more about you and kind of your journey to becoming a composer and a conductor. When did music become a part of your life, and what set you down the composing path?
Well, I was quite young when I remember, listening to some of my first set of orchestral records, and at that time, I was introduced to almost simultaneously an album of Gustav Mahler's, a couple of symphonic works that he had written, the Third and Fifth Symphony. There was a recording by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and then was introduced really at the same time to, by request, the best of John Williams and the Boston Pops Orchestra, which is one of the great albums he recorded in the mid-1980s when he was still music director there. And so, instantly transported into what was possible on both sides of the coin, both kind of concert music as well as film music, which really they are one and the same. It's just a matter of what that music is intended for as far as delivery vehicle. That's really the only difference. If you think about opera and ballet and film and even the silent film era where we used to perform live organ or chamber music,
Right.
Really the only difference is a delivery vehicle. So I was introduced very young, and I fell in love with music instantly. I knew right away I'd find a life in it, and have done everything I can since that day to try and wake up every morning and do something positive with music. And it's a wonderful thing to try and live.
That's awesome. Yeah. So how did CineConcerts come to be? What sparked the idea to form a company that would be dedicated, mainly to film music concerts live to picture?
Well, part of my falling in love with music when I was young was in large part due to many of the great film scores that I was introduced to. Whether or not it was King's Row by Korngold, or Chinatown by Jared Goldsmith, or the Pink Panther by Henry Mancini, or Star Wars by John Williams. I found a home in a lot of that music, as I did with much of Shostakovich's stuff and Mahler's music, Strauss. But with film in particular, I've always had a unique passion for, amongst all the other things that I do love. So it was always something for me that I hope one day we could start to preserve and present many of these scores that I admired as a child growing up, and which many people around the world also admire. And it was about 4 years ago that finally came to fruition. And with Gladiator, live, that became our first endeavor in exploring the potential of this genre. There really wasn't all that much going on 4 years ago, which is
Right.
not the case anymore. Fast forward 4 years later to today. But it's a passion, it really is, and I believe that this is one of the great art forms in our music world historically, and I think that as any great music deserves to be preserved, as does film music, and cherished in a way that people can admire from a patronage standpoint as well.
Absolutely. So putting on these concerts, it's such a huge endeavor, and I think a lot of people don't realize that how much work goes into these. So when you decide, like, okay, when you decided on Gladiator, kind of to start working on that, what kind of goes into the preliminary aspects of starting to do that? Do you have to secure the rights to the music first? How do you adapt it to a live performance, versus what we heard in the film? Are those kind of things that really take up most of your time in those, like, early days of it?
I think the first and most important thing, at least in my opinion and for me personally, is falling in love with what you're going to need to do. And you don't do that without loving the score first and the film first, at least in my case. I have to really enjoy the picture, find that the music moves me emotionally, because without that, you can't communicate what you don't feel when you're on the podium working with 85, 90 other musicians. So from the very beginning, for me, that's a very, very important piece of the puzzle. And beyond that, the first conversations are, of course, with the film studios. And depending on the film, the case of The Godfather, the music was either very well intact or non-existent. In the case of Gladiator, a great deal of percussion and voice restoration was needed as far as notation because, none of it was ever written down.
Right. Yeah. At least those voices were kind of all improvised.
They were, and she's so brilliant. She does an amazing thing with her career, and what she's known for and what she's so brilliant at is something that was perfect for that film. But in that particular case, there was no written down music, so we had to transcribe a great deal, and so there's that part of it too. The restorative effort is can be anything from substantial to very substantial. There's not really anything less. So at any rate, we've got the studios, of course, to collaborate with in the beginning, and as that relationship blossoms, so does building out the film and the music score and creating the format necessary to bring it to music halls worldwide in a way that musicians can read, audiences can understand, and of course the technology is part of it as well. So we have a lot of things that come together to synchronize all this music to picture.
Yeah, that's another what's the secret to staying in sync with the picture? I mean, to make sure the timing is on point, because you're focused on you're with the orchestra, you're conducting, and you're focused on them. But I mean, is there like a monitor? Is there some sort of way that you guys are able to stay in sync and perfectly every time?
Well, there's a number of ways to do it. And the way that it's generally done in the recording sessions, for the actual films, that we take out in concert format, but when they're being recorded before the movie comes out, normally is with a click track, which is to say, an audible sound in your earpiece, giving you the tempo or the tempi throughout that movement or movements that you're recording. That's certainly one way to do it. I shy away from that on the concert stage because I don't feel it's as organic as it can be without it. So we generally produce and present our projects with just streamers and punches. So I have my conductor video in front of me, and on that screen will just be a series of white flashes that we call punches and streamers. These vertical lines that move from left to right horizontally to help me have a guide to where the big moments are, big tempo changes. What the tempos should be across the entire concert. So with that, we synchronize together as an orchestra and as an entity on stage, and it is quite challenging. A 2.5, 3 hour movie, keeping everything together, and it's almost a minor miracle that we're together at the right place at the end of the film. But it's good fun.
I know, because you're picking some long movies there. Gladiator and Harry Potter, those are 2.5 hour
yeah,
movies.
There's some longer ones. That's true.
Yeah, Godfather. I mean, it's so impressive how you guys pull that all together. So I mean, what happens if, for instance, I know a lot of scores, usually a composer might use electronics or synthesizer. When it comes to translating those kind of things to the orchestra, is that a lot of work to kind of replicate to make it as authentic as it was, as we heard in the film?
Well, it depends on the situation. I think that if we're talking about synthetic sound for the sake of synthetic sound, as a complement to the orchestra, as an added color and added timbre, then yes, we try and replicate that as closely as possible. We generally steer away and steer clear of projects that we know were made with synthesizer because there wasn't an orchestra available.
Right.
Because people have been accustomed to some of those sounds. They're used to those synthetic sounds, but so when I think of the great composers that mastered that, beyond, of course, what John Williams is doing in Harry Potter, one of the first that comes to mind is Jerry Goldsmith. He was, avant-garde in every way, shape, and form, in addition to being very traditional and needed to be.
Right.
By using synthesizer to complement these giant orchestras that you record with. So in the case of Harry Potter, the most famous sound I think that comes from the synthesizer is in fact the music played for Hedwig's theme on the celeste that John Williams actually had Randy Kerber, who's a wonderful pianist in Los Angeles, design that sound from scratch. And it was intentionally made to be synthetic, to be more reverberant, to have this magical quality that the acoustical celeste didn't quite capture in the way that he had envisioned. So that is a primary example of where we absolutely try and replicate that sound. It's what fans know. It makes the film work in a certain number of ways. And in the case of Gladiator, of course, we try and uh, keep as authentic as we can to the sounds of Hans and Lisa. And in The Godfather, it's a very different thing, where it's very traditional. It's Italian traditional. It's very neoclassical in some ways. So in that way, we don't have any synthesizer at all.
Right, absolutely. So just kind of thinking about live concerts in general, and you mentioned just a few years ago this wasn't the case, but now we're seeing this sudden surge in live film music performances, and a big thanks part to your CineConcerts. But I mean, we see David Newman going on tour with, and John Williams, of course, performs every year at the Bowl, and Star Trek is live to picture. And what do you attribute all this kind of sudden surge in interest in this all of a sudden? And why now? I guess if from your standpoint.
Yeah, why now is actually, I think, a very, very good question because for so many decades, we can almost call it a sleeping giant of literature that we've had in our archives, in literally and figuratively collecting dust
Yeah.
in the archives of movie studios, has been waiting to just be preserved and waiting to be presented in this way. And I think that the primary reason, at least I want to believe, that the primary reason is because the music is good. It's because it's well written. It's because it does its job and people appreciate it. However, there is a very practical aspect to that, and that is how do we get that in front of audiences? And if the economic model doesn't make sense for orchestras, it doesn't matter how brilliant or not the music is. The economic model must make sense from a business standpoint, and that is the other reason why I think these are doing very, very well worldwide. Most are doing well worldwide. And that, you have to be careful with the project that you pick,
Right.
but
Right.
these have been able to kind of give orchestras an opportunity to, kind of absorb this thing that's been missing, and that is this bridge that perhaps the old world kind of classical audiences and the new modern classical audiences, which are dying more and more day by day worldwide. How do we connect these two together? And I think that what has been missing since the avant-garde in the 1960s in concert music is I should say one of the things missing. This remembering that if we cannot connect emotionally with our audiences, then what are we doing on stage? And at the end of the day, regardless of whether or not it's at its heyday, mid-19th century opera, or modern-day film music, or the silent film era, or some of the great ballets coming out of Stravinsky's pen, if we do not have audience, we don't have any way of entertaining or sustaining music on stage. So this is one of the biggest reasons I think that this genre is blossoming and is evolving very quickly, because orchestras are realizing it's bringing in a lot of new blood, fresh faces, fresh ears, and ultimately people that come back for their concert seasons as a result. So it's great.
Absolutely. And where do you see, I guess, film music and concert music in pop culture and mainstream? Do you see it more penetrating that kind of? I mean, I don't, it's never going to get to Lady Gaga status, I don't think. But like, do you see it becoming more part of mainstream than it has in the past?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, look, I think more people know the main theme to Star Wars than they could tell you the big hits of Lady Gaga. I think if you asked age ranges of 10 to 75-year-olds, you'd probably find more people that knows Jaws or knows Star Wars or knows Star Trek. So I think there very much is a pulp aspect to film music, and it's because of film. What
Right.
film is to our culture worldwide. Um, you know, what's popular now, of course, is very different than what it was in the 50s. I mean, pop music in the 50s was Billie Holiday, Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, and, progressive jazz could go on and on and on and on. It's very different now. But I think that what remains is a massive appetite for great music. And whether or not we choose to decide that Stravinsky or Lady Gaga or Bruno Mars or John Williams or Mahler is great music, that's up to, I think, a collective society as it pertains to its contextual place in history. Um, but without a doubt, music will be remembered because it's good. And I think there's so many scores that fall into that category. And I think that this will continue to blossom because of that very reason.
Absolutely. Well said. Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. So kind of to wrap things up a little bit, what would be a few of your dream scores that you would love to bring to life in the form of a CineConcert event? Something that
Uh,
if you had no limit on budget, if you could just take anything and just turn it into a concert, what's your wish list?
no limit on budget. Well, I got to tell you, we're already doing some of them, which I'm very happy to say. You know, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is among that list, as was The Godfather and Breakfast at Tiffany's. You know, everything that we've so far done, I'm so passionate of, and I admire what was accomplished in every single situation, every single example. But stuff that we haven't done, I would love to dive into the library of Maurice Jarre and of course Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh
It's an
yeah,
incredibly long film. Ben-Hur comes to mind. The original Ben-Hur comes to mind. The Ten Commandments comes to mind. You mentioned no budgetary limitations, so of course my mind goes to the longest possible movies. But there's also some things on the flip side where the music is very intimate. While there's not that much music, Patton deserves to be celebrated. Islands of the Stream deserves to be celebrated. One of the most beautiful films I think that Franklin Schaffner directed. Anything from the Cornwall Library. I mean, anything that was penned by Mancini. I could go on and on and on. I mean, there's so much material that we don't realize as a society that we fell in love with at some point in our life, but we perhaps don't know the reason why. And some of these projects help to perhaps give that answer to people when they come and they realize, wow, I never, even though this is the 100th time I've seen The Godfather, I never realized how powerful that music was, which actually was the case in San Francisco of a wonderful woman who I met. That was her 100th viewing in a movie.
wow,
And she couldn't believe how powerful the music was after seeing it that many times.
that's quite incredible. Well, I mean, congratulations on all the success that I mean, it's really steamrolling and you guys have some shows this year that are going to be fantastic, and I can't wait for that. And well, Justin, thank you so much for your time today. It's been such a great pleasure to chat with you.
Oh, thank you. The pleasure's mine, and I appreciate your time as well. And I appreciate what you're doing for the craft. Keep people in the know with what's happening. It's important, and it's a wonderful art form that deserves the light of day at all times.